Hey guys, I can't believe that I'm online right now because I always am like, am I on the right account? Yes, I am. I told myself that I would not do anything even remotely strenuous. Hi, my love. Thank you for joining. Because of how just tumultuous, just how difficult the past 2 weeks have been, like astrologically, like on a personal level, on an emotional level, the past 2 weeks have been so overwhelmingly draining that I was like, I'm not doing anything. I'm not speaking. I'm just gonna like sit my ass down and marinate. But there's, once again, as usual, there's so much going on this week that I was like, I can't not talk about it. Plus, I'm feeling a lot better. I think I needed that week to kind of like settle down. I know what's crazy is I was going to text you, Jess. In fact, I'm going to text you right after this. Okay, we'll talk because I like really do see you. But yes, so I want to talk a little bit about not only the full moon this Thursday, but also the fact that we had the summer solstice literally yesterday. And we have, Jupiter just went into retrograde yesterday. Mercury retrograde is over, but then we have Neptune retrograde like later in the week or next week. So I'm going to try to make this make sense. But just know, if you've been feeling like a lot has been going on, you are absolutely under like the collective current. But it's worth noting that whenever Mercury retrogrades happen, especially alongside all of the other retrogrades and like that eclipse season, a lot of stuff is going to get broken down. So a lot of stuff that we may have poured identity into or hope into or faith into may have in some way, shape, or form blown up in our face or knock on the way that we had sort of attached ourselves to it going. And so I hope that you allowed yourself to sit in the discomfort of that. I know, like, in my personal experience, I was experiencing a lot of that, and I was like, okay, well, how do I fix this? How do I figure this out? How do I make this right for, like, the sake of my need for control? And Mercury retrograde really, really, really wanted us to kind of sit in it, to sit with the discomfort, to dance with the discomfort a little bit and be like, how can I process this without distracting myself, without fixing it to the point where I don't even feel it? How do I let myself feel this, experience it, and move through it that way? So I hope that you took the time to do that because now is the time to go back into action. This isn't just because, hi, my love, thank you for joining, my Yaretsi. So this isn't just about like, how do I go into, or rather, just because Mercury retrograde ended is not the only reason why we need to go back into action, but rather like so much has happened. And when so much happens, you kind of have no choice but to kind of feel it. There wasn't much option for forcing or fixing. It was just a matter of like being in it. And now that we are out of retrograde season with Mercury and we are meeting this full moon in Capricorn on Thursday, everything is about like, okay, how can you take responsibility for your life? If things have broken down that you did not know would break down, if things have gone awry that you didn't know would go awry, I hope that you sat with like mourning the loss of that, mourning your attachment to any sort of narrative or any attachment to outcome. And now that you let yourself process that, are you in a state where you're really ready to take action to what it means to piece back together what you want to piece back together and to let lie what needs to let lie, right? So using the clarity that came from whatever was birthed from that retrograde and eclipse season, right? There was no doubt in my mind that you didn't experience some sort of truth, some sort of sobering truth, some sort of clarity on like, oh, maybe I don't want this, or maybe this person isn't for me, or whatever the case may be. Now we're in a state where, Capricorn is all about discipline. It's very like Saturn, obviously. Saturn ruled, right? Yes, it's Saturn ruled. So it's everything about like, how can I assume responsibility for my life and how can I implement action behind what it means to take care of myself again and to build a life that is now in alignment with my truth. Now that whatever has broken down has revealed the ways in which maybe I wasn't acting in alignment with my truth or when things were maybe playing more of a role of a facade, right? So let me look into my notes, honey. Yeah, whatever has fallen apart or showed necessity for adjustment right now is the time to do it. So please, 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 alongside this summer solstice too, because I want to talk about that because that was yesterday or the day before. And summer solstice, midsummer, whatever you want to call it, honey, it marks sort of like the middle 6 months into the year, and it's sort of like this midpoint check-in where now we're sort of operating under the light again and we can act alongside like, okay, what does it mean to come back to my power? I think if anything, this eclipse in this retrograde season showed us that there's so much that is outside of our control and we cannot lose our minds over the things that we have no forcible control over. But when we come back to our power, we do realize that we have choice in perspective, choice in response, and choice in how we speak to ourselves and what we do with the energy and the truth that we know ourselves to have and to be, right? If that makes sense. So with the summer solstice energy, really connecting us back to like our solar plexus energy. So please be working with the color yellow, right? With the color yellow, wear the color yellow, buy yellow roses. I have them right behind the camera. And more than anything else, work with that solar plexus energy to know that like, if anything, I have control over me. I have control over how I experience all of this shit. So I'm going to make sure that I'm coming back to self-care, that I'm talking to myself nicely, that I'm cutting out anyone that isn't talking to me nicely, and that I've created a safe environment for me to at the very least, maintain sanity and how I'm interacting with myself and how I am thus responding to whatever is going on outside of me, right? So work with the solar plexus energy, but the summer solstice, oh my God, child, not my mind, to come back to what it means to commit back to your power, to know that no matter what, no path of healing is linear, right? You're going to have dips, you're going to have ebbs, you're going to have flows, but like what should remain constant is knowing that you always have access to unlimited potential and unlimited power as long as you act alongside that, right? So if you know that at the end of the day, what makes me feel good is committing to my meditation practice, or, you know, creating, or, you know, not being in this friend group, or, you know, doing this thing, you know, come back to what that looks like for you, especially because the summer solstice is working right alongside this full moon in Capricorn to sort of show this juxtaposition of how we can approach our dreams rationally, right? So like the summer solstice wants you to dream as big as possible. You know, we're back to like light sort of encompassing more of our time. Knowing that you're that girl, period. Exactly. So now that we're sort of like in our light energy and our solar energy, we can dream big and we cannot, you know, impose limitations for the lives that we want for ourselves. And that is asking, well, the Capricorn full moon is asking of us, if we do want to dream big, how can we approach that rationally and assume responsibilities for the way that we approach that said dream? Spiritual themes in the summer are related to patience and nourishment and going deeper into your why. 100%. The thing is, so much of like that eclipse and that retrograde season really showed us like what our why is and what is not in alignment with our why and the roles that we've been playing and how we've been performative. So now that we sort of have a truth, I'm like, okay, this is actually where I want to show up. How can we like show up with that like potential being exerted, right? And spot on. Yay, that makes me so happy. So yeah, so this full moon in Capricorn is honestly, it's so harmonious, especially because there's so many other things that are going on that like this is a really nice energy to work with after all of the heaviness of what we just experienced. So really like use this full moon to like write down like, okay, if this is my action plan, is it an action plan that I can actually commit to that makes sense for me, that is manageable, that is like, you know, something that actually is in alignment with like the energy that I have to give, right? So come back with an action plan, come back to an action plan for how you want to rationally approach these larger than life dreams that you deserve to have and that you're capable of having. What else? There's so much going on. So yeah, full moon calls for putting action into plan and plan into action, just accepting responsibility, not only for your life, but for the decisions that you've made. If anything, especially this Jupiter going into retrograde. I'll talk about that and then I'll connect it. So Jupiter going into retrograde alongside Neptune that is soon going into retrograde. And also we have like Venus opposing Pluto and Mars opposing Saturn. So what this ultimately means is that a lot of like the mistakes or the versions of yourselves that you thought you may have grown out of may have like come to play a role in any way, shape, or form. A little displaced, but getting better, just been feeling overwhelmed. This is all, it's action mode. Yeah, and I feel like it's difficult sometimes to like sit and marinate in the stillness of like just being alongside your discomfort and looking at it in the eye. But now that we are being pushed back into like, okay, but what can you do to make yourself feel better? Like now that time is moving again, what are you going to do to actually be responsible with yourself and how you approach life is really, really liberating. But also give yourself like the time to crawl back there because it can also be exhausting. But yeah, so with Jupiter retrograde and all of this happening, there's this element of like sort of looking backwards, or rather like acting backwards to recognize why it is you want to move forward, right? So if old versions of yourself or if old habits, if old patterns are coming up at all, it's important to look at them and say, okay, I'm not going to beat myself up for doing things that I thought I grew out of or for acting and thinking in ways that I thought I healed through, but rather I'm going to look at it as this past version of me still exists within me. But if I am now arrived in who I am presently, I can move forward knowing that like, oh, that's why I chose to leave back or leave behind that habit or leave behind that person or leave behind that narrative, right? Like it's sort of a reminder, especially because Jupiter and Pisces moving back into Aquarius is showing us like, in what ways have you just been escaping? In what ways have you just been, you know, using your relationship with pleasure to actually be a way to like disconnect from your current reality and what's actually going on? Like how are you avoiding instead of just experiencing pleasure, which feels very convoluted. I think anything Neptunian is going to be convoluted and like weird and not make sense. But ultimately, this retrograde is showing you, if you've fallen back on old habits or old ways, it's important to not be, just like so hard on yourself, to recognize that happened, so you understand, oh, this is why I've done so much work and poured so much nourishment into me growing out of this. So hopefully that like resonates, because that's definitely showing up with the Jupiter. And also, there's so many notes that I want to refer to. Sorry, give me a second. So old mistakes either resurface or are made again, but it's important to be gentle with yourself and know that no sustainable path towards healing is linear. So those dips are really, really, really going to feed those highs, right? You're going to understand the fact that like living our most optimal lives and being in our most highest possible timelines is not something that's gifted to us. It's something that is like worked for and chosen constantly through choice, through perspective, through narrative, through dialogue. So if you want to actively commit to choosing what it means to be the best possible version of yourself, sometimes you need that reminder of like why it makes sense to work a little bit harder to be or live a fuller life than to like take the easy way and do things that you've grown out of, that don't actually feed and nourish your evolution. And just review. This is maybe, I'm wondering if this is just like specific to me, but this is how Jupiter in Pisces, moving back into Jupiter in Aquarius retrograde, is showing up for me. But it's really highlighting the ways in which like escapism is a way that I cope. And I know that that's sort of like a theme that's kind of happening collectively. So recognize the ways in which you implement escapism into the way that you cope and deal with stress or with anxiety or overwhelm. And escapism obviously looks like whatever it looks like tailored to you. So that can look like, substances, that can look like daydreaming, that can look like just evading any type of like responsibility or accountability. Whatever the case may be, recognize if you have an uncomfortable relationship with like facing discomfort in the eye, and if you can sort of tweak the way that you respond to just any sort of trauma, any sort of suffering, with the way that is present while also implementing what pleasure and self-care looks like, now would be the time to do it. So basically, in summary, we have a lot going on right now, but we're coming out of that heavy energy that you may have really been feeling. There are a lot of, with so much that's going on, there's this element of like reveal of truth. So if that hasn't already happened to you, I doubt it hasn't, but if it hasn't already happened to you, look for, truths or things to surface that you may have not expected. And know that anything that is bubbling up to the surface right now is meant to be looked at, because we're healing to the deepest part of our roots, which means it can get uncomfortable. But if we look at it in the eye and we acknowledge it instead of escaping and not looking at it in the eye, we can actually put ourselves on a path towards sustainable healing. And ultimately, with this full moon in Capricorn, come back to like, what does it mean for me to take responsibility for my life, for me to rebuild whatever has been broken down in a way that actually honors my truth and who I am now, right? Let yourself evolve. I think it's important to recognize the fact that like, yes, past versions of us exist in us always, right? Our inner child exists in us. Who we were a month ago, who we were a year ago exists in us. And like when these old habits come up, it's to show you like, who were you when you grew out of this, and why did you need to grow out of this? However, it's important to note that like who you are now is different, and it's different than who you're going to be a week from now and a year from now. And so honoring who you are now means making decisions for who you are now. So even if a certain form of escapism felt good a month ago, 2 months ago, even if a certain agreement, a certain person, a certain job, if something felt good a month ago, it felt good for who you were a month ago. And so all of this is coming to say, who are you now? And how can you assume responsibility for who you are now and the life that you want to live now? How do you need to mourn the loss of who you knew yourself to be before? Giving yourself the space to know that like, sometimes it was easier when I was less self-aware. And so I should give myself the space to like bid that farewell. But like building a life that resonates with who you are in this given moment, which could have radically shifted within the last month. That was a really transformative period. We're still in it, but we really went through like the peak of it. So know that if you were just transformed simply within the last like 2 to 3 weeks, honestly, honor the narrative that person you're standing in right now wants. And know that means bidding some maybe uncomfortable farewells, but if it's for the alignment and the truth of you, that's all that matters. So yeah, With Venus opposing Pluto and Mars opposing Saturn, there's really no place to run and hide, especially from yourself, which feels dark. This brings me hope. Okay, I'm so glad, because it's a lot. But yeah, there's no way to evade truth. So the way to approach it in a way that won't overwhelm you is to assume responsibility for how you can act alongside that truth to nourish the life that you deserve and want and are choosing to live. Now that you have clarity on what no longer works, what actually hurts, what needs to be looked at, right? I think a lot of irritation has been coming up. A lot of like triggers have been coming up. So things that you thought you healed through or ways of being that you thought you no longer resonate with are coming up. It's just asking to be looked at. So looked at, but use this Thursday super moon to really implement action on how you're going to choose to live the life. Or just assume responsibility for your life. That's the only way that I can say it. Like, just take accountability for the ways in which you may have messed up, the ways in which you continue maybe to mess up, and how you can actively choose to forgive yourself and pour into your healing. I do have a goldfish in my shirt. If you know the spiritual meaning of goldfish, please share. But otherwise, that's basically it. I know that I'm forgetting a ton, so if anything, just reach out to me, or I'll probably post something else. But I'm wishing you well. I'm wishing you peace. Know that I am going through it alongside you. I'm taking a break from as much as I can take a break of and coming back when I can. But I love each and every one of you. Jess, I'll text you. And yeah, I hope you have an amazing week and life. Okay. Bye.